On the 25th of December, a passenger airplane traveling from Baku, Azerbaijan's capital, to Grozny, the capital of Chechnya, a region in South Russia, crashed while attempting to land. The Embraer 190 aircraft with flight number J28243 was forced to make an emergency landing approximately 3 kilometers from the Kazakh city of Aktau. Survivors, including passengers and crew, reported hearing noises on the aircraft while it was circling over Grozny before the crash. Look at this eyewitness video that shows the plane crash in Kazakhstan. Another video shows rescuers pulling out survivors from the wreckage of the plane. The crash resulted in 38 fatalities, with 29 survivors sustaining injuries. Kazakhstan's emergencies ministry said fire services had quickly put out a blaze that followed the crash. And the survivors were being treated at a nearby hospital, and the bodies of the crash victims were being recovered. The ministry posted the video showing first responders at the scene moments after the plane crash. The video shows that the tail section of the aircraft remained relatively intact. The initial fears centered around a bird hit. However, the government and reports have increasingly pointed at a misguided anti-drone attack on the plane. US officials have indicated that Russian systems may have downed the aircraft amid heightened air defense activity triggered by ongoing Ukrainian drone attacks. On the other hand, Russian President Vladimir Putin called up his Azerbaijani counterpart Ilham Aliyev and apologized for the tragic incident in Russian airspace. The Russian Investigative Committee had opened a criminal case under violation of traffic safety rules and operation of air transport. In another conflict zone of West Asia, Yemen's Sana'a International Airport was heavily damaged following Israeli strikes. The World Health Organization chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus was at the airport when it came under attack. A bomb landed meters away. And then there was this. Just 4 days after the Azerbaijani plane crash, the world witnessed another deadly crash in South Korea. A plane skid off the runway and burst into flames. The horrific incident left 179 people dead. 2 survived. These incidents have shaken the entire aviation industry. Let's find out. How did the Azerbaijani airline plane crash in Kazakhstan? And what are the other plane crashes due to missile attacks? In the early morning of Christmas, flight J28243 took off from the airport of Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. It was due to land in Grozny, the capital of the Russian region of Chechnya. On board were 67 passengers, most of whom were Azerbaijani nationals, as well as those from Russia, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. But as the plane, an Embraer 190 operated by Azerbaijani Airlines, approached Grozny, it entered thick fog. Survivors described the pilot attempting to land the plane twice during these conditions. It was on the third attempt survivors felt a series of explosions hit the plane. A video filmed in flight by a passenger showed oxygen masks hanging from the ceiling. After the incident over Grozny, the plane diverted some 450 kilometers east to Aktau airport in Kazakhstan. Data released by the flight tracking website Flight Radar shows the plane zigzagging up and down as it approached Aktau, before turning and crash landing just kilometers from the airport. Initial reports from Russia suggested the aircraft collided with a flock of birds. However, aviation experts believe the plane's GPS was affected by electronic jamming. And it was then damaged by shrapnel from an apparent air defense missile blast.
Analysis of the debris from the aircraft has revealed a little more about the cause, and in particular the marks on the tail of the aircraft, which are truly representative of what are known as shrapnels. In other words, in an air defense missile, you have hundreds and hundreds of steel balls that go off in all directions, shredding the fuselage of the aircraft exactly as we can see here. We can see that these impacts are on top of the tail, meaning that the missile exploded above it. So it couldn't have been strapped by a Kalashnikov on the ground, for example.
Russian aviation authorities claimed that the pilots of the plane were offered other airports, but it chose Aktau to land. It remains unclear why it was diverted over the Caspian Sea, a longer journey than several other options.
I think there's a high probability that what the government of Azerbaijan has concluded is what happened, that being that a Russian air defense system misidentified the plane because the plane had been rerouted, and that they engaged it with air defense systems because because there have been attacks from that direction by Ukrainian unmanned systems, and so they probably mistook the passenger jet for a Ukrainian unmanned system and engaged it with air defenses.
Video from near the scene shows the plane descending rapidly through the air before crashing into the ground and skidding for several hundred meters. 38 people were killed and 29 survived. Some survivors were seen walking and crawling from the plane's wreckage. It is believed most of those who survived were seated in its rear. Zulfugar Asadov, a flight attendant of the crashed plane, said he received injuries in his arm as a result of external blows.
From the impact of the external blows, we realized that they had caused us injuries. I myself was injured in my arm. One passenger was also injured in the leg. At that moment, the impact that struck inside caused injuries. There were people who panicked, and we tried to calm them down, telling them not to panic.
Another survivor, Vafa Shabanova, said she felt 2 explosions which caused panic on board.
About 20 or 30 minutes after takeoff, we felt 2 explosions. The plane was supposed to land, but it didn't. Something exploded inside twice. A man's hand was injured. We panicked.
For Subhonkul Rakimov, one loud bang as it approached Grozny was an indication that the end was near. But it wasn't the case. He survived to tell his tale.
This is where everything was headed. To be honest, I wasn't even sure that I would stay alive. I already thought that it was all over. After the bang, I already got my mind set that something bad would happen now, because it was clear that the plane had received some damage. And when the plane started behaving unnaturally, then it became 100% clear that the end would be completely different. I already realized that it was all over. I decided I should film my last minutes now.
Russia and Kazakhstan have proposed having a committee from the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, a regional organization dominated by Russia, but Azerbaijan has instead demanded an international inquiry. Azerbaijan Airlines and several other airlines have suspended flights to Russian cities in response to the crash. For further investigation, the black boxes recovered from the Azerbaijan Airlines crash have been sent to Brazil, which is also the country that manufactured the Embraer aircraft. Missiles have become one of the leading causes of death among airline passengers in some of the world's most volatile regions. The skies, once considered a safe haven for international travel, have now turned into battlegrounds. According to the Flight Safety Foundation's Aviation Safety Network, the Kazakhstan crash marks the third major missile strike on an airline carrier since 2014. In July 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, or MH17, was brought down over eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board. What should have been a routine journey from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur turned into one of the deadliest aviation disasters in history, leaving behind grieving families. MH17, a Boeing 777, was cruising at 33,000 feet over eastern Ukraine on the 17th of July 2014, when it was struck by a surface-to-air missile. The missile, a Russian-made Buk system, exploded just outside the cockpit, breaking the plane apart in mid-air. The wreckage rained down on fields and villages in the war-torn Donetsk region. All 298 passengers and crew lost their lives. The Malaysian airliner was not alone. 3 other foreign passenger jets were also in the same radar control sector. In the days following the crash, investigators faced significant challenges. Access to the site was delayed due to prolonged fighting. The investigation was led by the Dutch Safety Board and the Joint Investigation Team, a coalition of nations affected by the tragedy. After months of painstaking work, they concluded that a Buk missile launched from separatist-controlled territory was responsible for the downing of MH17.
Flight MH17 crashed because of a 9N314M warhead detonated outside the aeroplane above the left side of the cockpit. This warhead fits the kind of missile that is installed on the Buk surface-to-air missile system.
Missile strikes against a civilian passenger plane are believed to be a scare from the Cold War era. The first incident took place in 1983 against a Korean airline flight 007. Charting a path from New York to Alaska to Seoul, was shot down by a Soviet interceptor jet after a navigation system error guided the flight into Soviet airspace, which was a prohibited area. As it neared Soviet airspace, Flight 007 was tracked at military installations. American surveillance aircraft included Boeing RC-135S. The military version of a Boeing 707 looked like a civilian airliner. It was later reported that the Soviet pilot mistook the airliner for a surveillance plane in the dark. All the people on board, a total of 269 passengers, were Soviet Union initially declined to admit responsibility for shooting down the plane, which hampered diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet foreign minister issued an apology to South Korea in 1991, nearly 8 years after the incident. In 1988, Iran Air Flight 655, an Airbus A300, took off from Bandar Abbas, Iran, and was headed for Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. The plane was blown from the skies by a missile, fired from the guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes as it flew over the Persian Gulf from Iran to Dubai. Later it was reported that the USS Vincennes mistook it for an Iranian F-14 fighter jet. The US military believed those Iranian F-14s were equipped with Maverick missiles that could strike US ships. The US said the Navy made 11 radio warning calls on different frequencies before the Vincennes fired 2 missiles at the airplane, bringing it down and killing all 290 aboard, 66 of whom were infants and children. In 2001, a plane carrying passengers from Tel Aviv, Israel to Novosibirsk, Russia, was shot down over the Black Sea. Siberia Airlines Flight 1812 from Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport to the Siberian city of Novosibirsk went down in the Black Sea, some 185 kilometers southwest of the town of Sochi. The aircraft, a Soviet-made Tupolev Tu-154, carried 66 passengers and 12 crew members. Most of the passengers were Israelis visiting relatives in Russia. There were no survivors. On January 8, 2020, the world woke up to the devastating news of a plane crash in Iran. Ukraine International Airlines Flight PS752 was shot down shortly after takeoff from Tehran, killing all 176 people on board. It was a routine flight from Tehran to Kyiv, but just minutes after takeoff, flight PS752 disappeared from radar. It crashed near Tehran, leaving behind a trail of wreckage and shattered lives. Among the 176 passengers and crew were 55 Canadians, 11 Ukrainians, and dozens of Iranian and other nationals. Tensions between Iran and the US were soaring at the time of the attack on flight PS752. Iranian air defenses were on high alert after launching strikes on US bases in Iraq in retaliation for the killing of General Qasem Soleimani. Initially, Iranian authorities claimed the crash was due to a technical failure, but 3 days later, Iran admitted that its forces mistakenly shot down the Kyiv-bound flight after firing 2 missiles.
I take full responsibility and I will obey whatever decision is taken. I would prefer to die rather than witness such an incident.
As we have seen, numerous flights were shot down by missiles, killing many innocent lives up in the skies. But there was one incident that stood apart. It brought forth a different story of landing. In November 2003, shortly after takeoff from Baghdad International Airport, an Airbus 300 cargo plane owned by the Belgian division of European Air Transport and operated by Express Courier Service DHL was struck by a surface-to-air missile. Severe wing damage resulted in a fire and loss of hydraulic flight control systems. It is the hydraulic system of an aircraft that allows it to raise and lower the landing gear. The three-man experienced aircrew decided to make its way back home to the Baghdad International Airport. While returning to Baghdad, the crew took a new method of flying, using just engine power. Minutes later, the crew made a safe landing of the aircraft. This incident is seen as nothing short of miraculous, as the crew survived despite being hit by a missile. And it was also the first time an airliner successfully landed without hydraulics and backup solely on engine power. These disastrous incidents have proliferated airspace warnings in recent years. As the world enters an era of increasing geopolitical tensions, international civil aviation is facing more distress and restrictions. The battlegrounds are being created, not just on land, but also in the skies. Will 2025 bring any significant changes? Or will the skies become even more perilous?